Donc, notre prochain présentateur est Pierre Lanciault.
Our next presenter.
Our next presenter is responsible for management at the Survey Design and Data Collection Center. He's responsible for various surveys. He studied at the University of Sherbrooke in the area of geographic systems. Welcome, Pierre. Welcome, everyone.
I'll be able to answer any question in French afterward, obviously. At first, I was asked to present on Data Gap, a Data Gap project that we're working on right now, but I thought that it would be better to explain a bit what we're doing as for collecting data right now and then talk about the data gaps. I know that I present at CMHC on a regular basis about our survey, and even within CMHC, people do not know what we're doing. So I thought that for you guys that are not with us all the time, it would be better to start by what we're doing. Now, as Sophie told you, I'm responsible for the surveys here at CMHC. I guess you can see the surveys at CMHC as being like the housing division of StatsCan, because we do something very similar to what our friends at StatsCan are doing. I mean, obviously, we're not exactly the same thing, but you know, it's very similar of what StatsCan does as for surveys. Now, I'm saying that I'm responsible for surveys because there's other types of data that we collect through our regular business, especially in the insurance sector. So I'm not going to talk about that much today. I'm going more about the survey and the Data Gap initiative that we're working on right now. So first, the surveys. We have 8 major surveys that we're conducting, sometime on a monthly basis, quarterly basis, or an annual basis. The starting completion survey is the most important one. It's conducted on a monthly basis. I'm going to talk about that a bit later. The purpose-built rental market survey. So that's the survey that we conduct twice a year. The secondary rental market survey. So there's 3 components to it. So anything that is not primary rental market would be considered in the secondary rental market. We also have surveys on condominium owners that we've started 3 years ago. I'm going to talk about that a bit later. And also the senior housing surveys. Now, you'll see that most of our surveys are more on the supply side than the demand side. And I know that from what you discussed today and other sources that the demand side is something that we are really interested by, and I'm going to bring that in the second part of my presentation when I'm going to talk about data gap. But most of our survey, you'll see there's 1 or 2 exceptions, are on the supply side. So we're asking those people that are providing, you know, like the builders or like the property manager on the rental side and things like that. So the first survey I'm going to talk about is the starting completion survey, to which I add market absorption survey. It's the same survey, basically. It's just that we have different geography and different timeline for that. So the overall objective of that survey is to follow residential construction, obviously. And there's 3 steps to that survey. There's a start. It's basically when there's a hole in the ground and there's a foundation that has been poured. And then there's a completion. So at the time it is completed. And the absorption. Absorption, it's a term that we use at CMHC, but I know because I receive like 2,000 phone calls and emails a year. What do you mean by absorption? It's not a concept that is understood by everyone. So you can compare that to sales. Now, we are looking to get sales as close as the actual sale date and the actual sale price, but it's not as easy as it sounds to collect that information. And absorption for us, it's the actual sales, but we just report it at completion. So it might have been sold before. Obviously, most of houses are being sold even before they're being built, but we do report what we call absorption at completion. So it will be the sale information at completion. We do a lot of categorization. One is dwelling type, for example, single, semi-row apartment. Another one would be the market, intended market. So it's homeowner, condo, rental or co-op, for example. Those are things that we're looking at. We also do price at absorption, like sale price at absorption, like I mentioned a second ago, for single and semis. And we are working, and that is one of the gap that I'm going to talk a bit later, at price for individual condominium units also. So again, it's not as easy as it might sound. We do cover all centers 10,000 plus, so the entire country is covered as a census. So it's not a survey, it's a census basically. 10 to 50,000, we do that on a quarterly basis, where everything more than 50,000, we do that on a monthly basis. So every month, we do release data on our website and press releases. It's often taken by the radio and the television and the newspaper also. So we do that on a monthly basis. For the less than 10,000, so what we call rural, we do a sample of municipality that represent the rest of the province, if you want. So for example, you would have 4 or 5 strata where it's small cities with not a lot of development, small city with a lot of development, larger city with no development, and then large city with a lot of development. And then we would pick some municipality and we would create a provincial level number for the rural areas. The second survey I want to talk about is the rental market survey, the purpose-built rental market survey. So we do conduct that survey twice a year, so it's April and October. It's not a census, it's a sample survey. We have a universe of all the structures that are rental in Canada, and we do add up new structures as they come to our survey. We look at 3 different variables, basically. It's the vacancy rate, the actual rent level, and the availability rate that was added about 2006, about 9 years ago. We have information about the universe. We're looking at also if there is like eating or cable or internet and those stuff. We're asking the question, though we do not use that in the preparation of our data at the moment. Again, for that, we're covering all center 10,000 plus, and we have a pattern with selecting, for example, all the structure with more than 30 units will be included into our sample. And for smaller centers, we do include almost all the structures in those centers to be able to produce data that are statistically reliable. I think that's enough for this one. If you have questions after you, I would be able to answer them. The third survey that I'm going to talk about is the Condo Vacancy survey. Basically, now we're going into what I call the secondary rental market survey. So those are condo units that are not for sale, that are rented out by the actual owner. So we have developed a database, a universe of all the condominium structures across the country. We're talking about apartment, not row, so apartment structure only in that case. And we are contacting them every August, September to collect information on how many of those units are rented out by the owner. As for statistic, like I said, vacancy rate, rental rates is how many of those units are rented compared to the overall number of condo units in the building is something that we're looking at. We do conduct that survey in, I think it's 16 centers. I haven't counted them because we've just added a couple of them this year. They're listed there at the bottom. And we're planning to add Halifax in 2016. One thing that is particular about the condo vacancy survey is we use that survey as a vehicle to ask a question about foreign investment. So it's not related to the rental market at all, but because we're reaching out to the actual property manager of those condo structures, we are asking them how many of those units are there belongs or owned by people that live outside Canada. The primary residence is outside Canada. So it could be Canadians that live abroad or people that simply are not Canadian and live in other countries. So we had published data last year about at that time, and we are about to release data on December 3rd for this year's surveys. The other survey I'm going to talk about, that's a condo rent survey, and this one is going, we're asking the actual tenant. The approach for this survey is a bit awkward, not awkward, but complicated, which I should say, is basically we take all the structures that we have in our condo vacancy universe, and we get those addresses and we send that to a company that provide phone number of people that would live within those structures, and we contact them to try to get the information about the rent. Why we're doing it that way? Because when we were contacting the actual condominium property manager, they don't have the information at which the actual owner of the condo is renting out his unit, to somebody else. So they have the information about who's doing it, but not about the actual cost. You'd see that out of the 16 centers, I think I said earlier, we're not covering all of them because we need to have a big enough sample to reach enough tenant to be able to produce reliable data. That's every year it's a challenge to get to that level because it's hard to reach people that are willing to participate. I guess our friends at StatsCan here understand that a lot, but it is quite complicated to get that information. The next survey, it's the Outsole rent survey. Again, related to the secondary rental market survey. Again, there we're going to the tenant. So both the condo rent survey and the Outsole rent survey are not conducted internally by us. We subcontract that to a company that use CATI, the computer-assisted telephone interview system, to contact, in that case here, it's a random phone number. And basically, the goal of that survey is to provide information about average rents for it could be, for example, accessory suite. It could be a single that is rented out or a semi. Anything that is not covered by our primary rental market survey, which covers only, I've mentioned that before, but the purpose-built rental market survey only covers structures with at least 3 units for rent. So at least 3 units. So a single, a semi would not be covered there. Duplex in Montreal that are quite popular are not covered there, not yet. So that's that survey that is taking care of that. So, and we are conducting that survey through all those centers that are listed there. And again, we've just had the 3 new centers this year to be able to have a better picture of the different markets. There's 2 other surveys that we're conducting. There's one called the Condominium Owner Survey. This one is conducted only in Toronto and Vancouver because that's where most of the condo issues have been identified in the past. There's other centers that we're looking at, Montreal, Calgary, for example, other centers that we are expecting to do something in the future. That said, priority and costs, it's always the thing that we need to be worried about, and those cost a lot of money. So basically what we're looking there is mortgages, rent levels, loan-to-value ratio, motivation, the number of secondary unit. Basically what we want to do is we want to look at people that own 1 unit or more than 1 unit, 2 and plus units, basically. And we have 2 profiles. The 1 unit is people that live in, that's their own residence most of the time. So they would live there and, we consider them, are you an investor in the sense that are you going to sell that in 2 years and then buy something else like a single or something bigger? But that portion of it is not the important part. The second part is the important part, is those that have more than 1 unit. So they might live in a permanent residence and then they have 1 additional condo unit. So we want to know why they have that. Is it for a purpose for investment? Is it for a kid going to school at university? Is it because, might live in the country and want to have a place in downtown Toronto? So we're looking at all of that, and we're looking at all the financial detail to see if those owner are at risk, let's say, if there were an adjustment in the price of houses across the country. Again, this one is conducted by a third-party company, and it's conducted in August-September timeframe in Vancouver and Toronto, like I mentioned earlier. The last survey that we are responsible here at CMHC is the Senior Housing Survey. This survey is conducted once a year in February, March. We've been doing that since 2008, I think, and it's really a census of all the structures across the country. It is quite complicated because CMHC, a bit like Statistics Canada or any other department, we have a Canadian mandate, so we want to produce data that are good across the board, you know. And there's a lot of difference between provinces in the housing market. From Quebec, where there's a la carte approach, where other provinces where it's all in, you know. So those differences make it difficult for us to have a picture that is that would make everyone happy. So we do the best to what we have. So we have identified what are the structures that we're looking at. Basically, the majority of residents needs to be 65 and over. Residents must provide an on-site meal plan. It doesn't have to be mandatory, but they have to provide it. No EV care facilities. We do not look at that because the differences between the provinces are so great that we will need to have 10 different surveys to cover that. And the residents must have 5 units and more for BC and Atlantic, and 10 units and more for Ontario, Prairies, and Quebec. And they have to be open for at least 1 year for us to be considering them. So the goal is to collect rent, vacancy rate by unit type, amenities, utility when it was open and all that, and to report that in our publication every year. So I'm not sure if you were aware of all those surveys. Another thing that people are not aware of is we are producing reports on all of those surveys for free on our website, and, you know, for you to go and just check the result. So we do report data, produce report on a monthly basis for certain of our survey and on annual or quarterly basis for others. They're all on our website. One great addition to CMHC website 2 years ago was the Housing Market Information Portal. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that, but it's self-serve data mine. I mean, you go there and you can ask for whatever you want for the area that you want, and it will provide you the information that has been collected through our survey. So I think the data goes back to 1990 for the start and completion, because that's when we have a new system and we've collected the information. And as far as that, for sure, for the rental market survey also, and the other survey that I've talked about. We produce also a lot of time series that are distributed through CanSim and through the conference board and other places. So even on open data, the open data government, federal government website, we have data there. And we do some ad hoc requests on a regular basis. In fact, very, very often we do requests for specific, people might look at Vancouver, but North Vancouver for that date to that date, so we would be able to extract the information there and provide that. There's a cost to those ad hoc requests, just so you know. The cost is not for the data, it's the actual time that we are taking to produce those data. Something very important, and I'm sure our friends from StatsCan would agree, is that confidentiality is the key of our survey. If we do produce data that allow people to be identified, they won't be providing data to us in the future. So access to individual record have been limited only to my area. So we have 2-door lock, and CMHC employee cannot just go there and enter. There it's locked, so you need to ring to get there. It's just a handful of people that have access to that area, and it's well protected. Tools have been developed by IT, my IT group, and by other groups within our Market Analysis Center, where we can extract information based, for example, on a specific point with a radius. So, for example, if I think about the rental market survey, I would like to know all the average price for the 2-bedroom unit within 1 kilometer of 700 Montreal Road, for example. Okay, so that tool allows us to provide information that is not based on the current geography that we're using, but also allow us to maintain confidentiality for our data, and statistical reliability, obviously, is the two main concerns that we have that we want to maintain here. Okay, so that was the actual presentation on surveys. That's what we're collecting here at CMHC. Like I mentioned, there's other data that we were producing to our business, insurance, for example, data on mortgage and all that. But I'm not going to go too far on this side, as I'm not a specialist for that. Now, in 2014, there was an initiative that was launched that was called Data Gap Initiative. It's still going on. And at that time, we started to see why we should do that. In fact, I mean, I've been at CMHC for a long time. In 2006, we had a Data Gap Initiative too, and we went to consultation and all that. So in 2015, there's 2014, 2015, 2016, there'll be another one. This one is much bigger than the first one that we did in 2016 in the sense that we just don't want to add data. We are extending our collaboration with other federal departments, Statistics Canada being one of them, Department of Finance, Bank of Canada, OSFI, which is Office of Superintendent of Financial Institution. Yeah, good to remember that. But, we're trying to get wider. And not only federal partners, but also stakeholders across the country, private companies or associations, like many of you here. So what have we done up to here? So like I said, we started in 2014, and we had an initial consultation that was more related to housing finance and housing market. So housing needs, which probably is the topic that most of you would be interested by, is to start soon in 2016. So the good news is if you have something that you think about, maybe it's a good thing to NHRC to share that with us, and then we would add that. But there will be consultation across the country with many, many groups. So we did that in 2014, and there was in June this year a stakeholder roundtable that was organized too that allowed us to identify the priority data gaps. So those data gaps, when identified, they have been prioritized, and we're looking at their feasibility because there's a lot of things that people want, but I mean, it's not feasible. I mean, we would need much more resources than we have to do them, but based on that, we are prioritizing them. And the key data gap that we've identified up for now, and like I said, it's more related to housing finance and housing market. Housing needs will come soon. On the housing finance side, there's a portrait of the entire mortgage market, mortgage origination, outstanding mortgages, defaults, foreclosures, and things like that. Those are things that we've identified. CMHC already have a bunch of those information in-house because we are responsible for a part of the market, but not the entire market. So now we want to get a better picture of everything that is outside also, and we'll try to share that as much as possible with Canadians in general. On the housing market side, obviously the market conditions, the condominium market conditions is something that is very interesting for us, hence the condo owner survey that we've started 2 years ago. I think the biggest one right now is foreign investment. At least that was triggered the most press in the recent month. So we did, like I said, add a question in a condo vacancy survey just as a vehicle to get some information there. But we're also looking at, anything that would be helping us in assessing the house prices. We just released a couple of months ago the HPA, which is the House Price Analysis and Assessment. Now it has been renamed for Housing Market Assessment that gives information about different centers based on 4 criteria where the price is, is it overselling, overbuilding, over price, and all that. And that has been released by CMHC in some of our publication already. So we're working towards filling those gaps, but there is a lot of things that still needs to be done. One of the things that I forgot to mention earlier when I talked about the start and completion survey, since 2012, we are started to collect information about accessory suites that are newly constructed. So every time there's an accessory suite, we're not reporting on them yet, but we will report on them soon as for the number of accessory suite that is built. A bit like Statistics Canada, we're looking only at self-contained unit. So if it's a bedroom in the basement of your house, no kitchen, no bathroom, we won't be counting that as an accessory suite. We need to have like a full dwelling. Like I said, housing needs, data gaps are coming soon. I think the next slides are, we'll be talking about that in a couple of minutes. So our plan right now is to continue our role of at least an active role with the different group, federal department, lenders, banks, anything like that, because we're now concentrating on the housing finance and the housing market. We will continue to address data gap on our own where we can do it on our own, but most of the time it will be through with the help of other groups, Statistics Canada being one of them, obviously. Housing data gap. So housing needs is, like I said, something that we have started, in fact, in 2015, in Q3, Q4 2015. We've started to put a team in place to analyze the need internally. We're going to have more consultation this year, so internally and probably externally after that. And we are going to try to come up with as much information as possible. Amongst that, housing needs, supplies and trends. There's also information, for example, on seniors that is quite important for you guys, as you might, two presentations at least today, and I just was there for the afternoon. So those are things that we're looking at. And looking at collaborating with people that have information, a bit like the lady from BC there, data on the demand side, not on the supply side like our survey right now. We've identified like some data gaps, so those are things that I've already mentioned. 2016, I've already mentioned that too. All of that has been mentioned before, so I'm going to go to the second or the next slide. Just don't want to lose too much time, and if you have questions, so I'm just going through that, and I've already mentioned all of those things. Yes. And maybe just finish with that. Why are we doing that? It's obvious. If there's data gap, it's because there's a need for those data. But more than that, one of the things that I really like about that slide, it was not created by me, it was created by somebody else in the past, is prevention of ill-considered opinions and improvability to refute wild talk. And that's very important, especially in the foreign investment side, because we have those anecdotal information about it's 25%, it's 30%, and all that. By having those data gap filled, would be able to prepare something that would say that's the actual picture. Now that cannot be done within a year or within a month, obviously not. Within a year, maybe it's a couple of years before we'll be able to fill all those gaps, but it's something that we are working on at CMHC. All of that to let you ask me any question you want now.
If you have any questions for Pierre, here in the room or on the web, Dave.
We've already talked offline about transit relationship and the importance of GIS data on starts and transit. So that I just wanted to log that. But
make it official now.
It's official now, exactly. Secondly, in effect, one of the implications of what I was saying is that we're expecting a lot more households probably to live in multiple forms in the future, families, that is, with children. Right now, 85% of families with children live in low-rise, ground-oriented housing, but we do not have, from the starts and completion survey, the bedroom counts and the heights of apartments. And so I guess my question is, how difficult would it be to add those, at least at a minimum, to make them conform with the census categories?
I'm happy that you asked that question because we already worked on that. We are collecting the number of floor for the last year or so. And we are also collecting the number of bedroom for rental and now condominium structures. We're also looking at square footage for both the rental and the actual condominium units. So that's something that we're working on. I would say that 2016 is probably the year where we're going to put that all in place as part of our survey. We're also looking at, right now what we have is single, semi-row, and apartment. There's a split, there's a new approach that we want to take. In addition to that, we might have, I think the category is, there's single, and then there's ground-oriented, and then there's low-rise and high-rise apartment buildings. So that would represent the link with StatScan. So we're working on that too. So yes.
So the other thing I wanted to talk about is what you were discussing in terms of, quote, foreign ownership. It appears from studies on the ground, again, just samples or whatever, that what we're dealing with actually, maybe in some markets, is actually, shall we call it, staged Canadianism. It's occupation by a family in sequence. So actually they're planning to be, they either are or be planning to become residents. But quote unquote, they also have a big foreign connection. So I guess the economists who work for us tried to define it out of existence by saying, well, no, actually, there's not very much, quote, foreign ownership. But the reality is they're not, and they're not. But they could be a sort of hybrid type of ownership that, you know, they're scamming the system, maybe, but they're also acting like residents and need to be treated as residents.
So, I mean, imagine just finding information about foreign investment, pure foreign investment, it's very difficult, you know. And for example, having your son being a permanent resident living in Toronto, coming from India as an example, you know, and you give him $1 million so he can buy a condominium. He's a permanent resident, he's buying the house, so for us it's not a foreign investment. That's hard to identify, you know, that's really hard to identify. So those are things, though, that we thought about and that we're going to try to address. Now, we try to do things that are can be done easily at first and try to find ways to do things that are more complicated, obviously, yes. Yes.
Est-ce qu'il y aurait d'autres questions?
Are there any other questions? Matthew?
Is there any way we can convince you to do your surveys on the secondary market on communities smaller than 10,000?
Right now, like I said, the CVS, I think the Condo Vacancy survey, that's what you're talking about, the Outsole rent survey.
All of the surveys on the secondary market.
Market. Yes, basically now we have identified, like I said, 16 major centers. We are using Statistics Canada number to identify which one should we go to. You know, there's an approach to identify those. For example, Saskatoon, I know you're from Manitoba, and Winnipeg, I think, is it covered? We're not even sure.
Yeah, it's the only one, but
It's
we
the
have a
only
lot
one.
of other places we have no idea what's going on with the secondary market.
Yes. Again, it's a question of costs and priorities. Convincing me is it's not hard. I'm convinced if you ask it, but it's more upstairs that I will have to come up with a good business plan to do that. Yes.
Is it just a matter of data enrichment, that, you know, a financial contribution, or is it, would StatsCan need to change their survey method?
I think that it's also the fact that how many condominium, for example, I'm looking about the condo side, how many condominium there is in the center less than 10,000 people. So the number is so small that if we were to try to survey them, we won't be able to produce any data. Now, if you're talking about anything else than condominium, for example, single for rent, a semi for rent, or accessory suite, bigger center usually have a better handle of those accessory suite, and we can have information. Then we can go and ask for data at that point. But smaller centers, it's more difficult. In some of those cases too, we are working with the phone number. Our phone number, when we try to reach the entire population, if we use landline, usually we concentrate our effort on older portion of the population. So we need to work now to get a better coverage with the cell phone also. Once we'll have a bigger, like a more general approach for the phone service that we're conducting, we might, do smaller centers, yes. Now, if there's centers in particular that you would be interested by, and there's a need for it, and it's identified, there's always possibility for collaboration. Now, how it would be done and all that, we can talk about that. I have cards there. You can take one, and we can talk about later. Right now, there's no official plan at least for that in the near future.
Oh, yep.
I followed with great interest all of the work you and your colleagues do on behalf of CMHC, and we use this data with great interest as well. I would like to know, when you're collecting data, do you consult other stakeholders with regard to their needs? Has there been some overture to a partnership because our data needs are the same for all of us? So is there any openness with regard to opening this up further? Take, for example, your rental survey. This is data we often use, and there are indicators that we draw from this survey, occupation rates, prices, etc., and sometimes it's very regional. Quebec is a particular case. We have cut up the province. A lot of our municipalities are quite large, and these indicators are very useful to us in our work. In the context of our programs, oftentimes the distribution of our programs isn't regionalized. So I would like to know what the situation is. Very good question, and I think you'll like my answer. We have individual points for the various structures where we collect data for the rental market. We use geographical elements that we've defined with the Montreal office that is in touch with various stakeholders province-wide, as is the case in every province, as a matter of fact. That being said, we need an approach that's standardized throughout the country. What I would answer is this. If you would like to have a different geography, you can make a request to us and we'll be able to compile the data based on your new grid. Sometimes there are costs involved, but depending on the type of survey you want, I'm convinced that we'll be able to do something. And these lists will only be provided if they respect the confidentiality requirements, as well as the statistical significance or import criteria. So we won't provide data that isn't statistically valid. So you could pick up one of my business cards as well, and we'll be able to chat. Just call me up anytime.
Final question for
Yes.
you, Pierre. You talked about the condo apartment vacancies. The absorption. So
Okay.
the starts, completions, and absorption.
Yes.
And when you talked about the condo units, you specifically said you're measuring, or you want to measure the price at completion.
I mean, in fact, what we want to do is to measure the price at sale. And we try to have the sale date too.
Okay.
What I was saying about absorption is, and that's historical, we've been doing absorption for a long time, is that because we're not able to get the sale price at sale date, we do take the time while it's constructed to complete our information, and we do release sale at completion,
Okay.
which we call absorption.
Okay.
Okay, so that's it. So we're trying, though, as part of our data gaps, and we've been trying, and it's not as easy again as it looked, to collect individual price for each of the condominium as early as possible. So we're looking at approach now that look at pre-start, having, before it's even started.
Yep.
You would see that most condominium structure are, they're not even built, but they will have an ad that says 70% sold.
Yep.
So that's what we're trying to look at, but it requires work.
So we should talk.
Yes,
We
no,
have
we
already,
already-
we have
we already
already,
talked.
we have already spoken on a number of occasions, but with
Talk
what
more.
we're doing for the new condo apartment survey, it seems like that's what you're trying to do, so
Yeah.
we should talk, and
Yes.
I think this has been a really useful session, if only for the fact that we can start to make these kinds of linkages and see opportunities to really, leverage on projects that are already unfolding. And I'm thinking especially survey financial security. I know your module on mortgage is probably near final, but, you were talking about housing financial indicators and
Yes.
mortgage debt, and that's another opportunity for, leveraging on something that's already going ahead.
I know that Statistics Canada, I don't know which group and all that, are already part of our consultation. I don't know at what level exactly. I was just assigned to that project recently. But there will be consultation with Statistics Canada, obviously. And our group too,
Yeah.
your working group and all that, we already work together. So it's something to continue for sure, yes.
Do you want to say anything before we close? Okay, so I'll let Duncan, if he wants to say a few words. Thank you so much, Pierre.